Imagine being imprisoned for stealing food, sentenced to a brutal life across the seas. This was the reality faced by a young Cornish woman in the late 18th century. Her name? Mary Bryant. And what she accomplished will leave you absolutely spellbound. Buckle up, because this is the story of one of history's boldest escapes, an audacious journey that humiliated an empire and defined the indomitable spirit of freedom. The year is 1786. Britain's jails are bursting at the seams. London streets smother under the weight of what the elite call the criminal class. Murderers, pickpockets, forgers, but also those simply starving and desperate enough to steal bread, like Mary Bryant. A simple Cornish fisherman's daughter, Mary was thrown into the hellish dungeon of Newgate Prison for stealing a bonnet and some food. Her crime? Survival in a time when poverty clamped its icy grip on millions. But Mary's story doesn't end here. It begins. Fast forward 2 years. Mary, along with hundreds of convicts, is loaded onto the grimy, suffocating ships of the First Fleet, a flotilla bound for what was then called New South Wales, a god-forsaken penal colony at the edge of the earth. The ships creak, chains clank. The air is thick with the stench of despair. For months, they're tossed by the cruel seas, and when they finally land in the barren wilderness of what would become modern-day Australia, their hope dies a little more. This is not a paradise. It's a prison without walls. But Mary? She met her challenges head-on. She married a fellow convict named Will Bryant, a fisherman like her father, and soon gave birth to 2 children. Life in the colony was bleak. Hunger stalked their every move. Scurvy claimed lives left and right. Any semblance of escape seemed impossible, or so thought the British authorities. Mary, however, had other plans. Here's where the story goes from bleak to absolutely unbelievable. In 1791, Mary, alongside her husband, young children, and a handful of others, committed one of the greatest prison breaks in history. Stealing a boat belonging to none other than the British governor himself, the convicts set out on an almost 4,000-mile journey to freedom into the unknown waters of the Pacific. Pause. Let's put that into perspective. This wasn't a yacht. This wasn't a well-equipped vessel ready for adventure. No, this was a stolen, open boat with limited provisions. And yet, against all conceivable odds, they navigated their way through treacherous waters teeming with sharks and their own despair. Imagine for a moment, you're Mary, clutching your infant, the salty spray of the ocean blinding you as gigantic waves threaten to engulf the boat. Starvation looms. Death whispers in your ear, but you refuse to go quietly. You refuse to break. For months, Mary and her crew braved storms, tropical cyclones, and waves that seemed like mountains. Unbelievably, they reached Timor, the island then controlled by the Dutch. The British had not prepared for an escape like this. Who would dare to defy the empire, right? But Mary did. They pose as shipwreck survivors, convincing the Dutch authorities to shelter them. For a glorious moment, they taste the sweetness of freedom. Delicious meals, real beds, a life far removed from the grim penal colony. But Mary's freedom wasn't destined to last. The iron grip of the British Empire was vast and unyielding. Word of the escape eventually reached British naval officers. The fugitives were captured and dragged back to Britain in chains, paraded as criminals at every port. This, however, backfired spectacularly. Mary's tale sent shockwaves through the empire. Newspapers picked up the story. Pamphlets turned her into a folk hero, a David defying the Goliath. She became a symbol for resistance against cruelty and injustice. In court, Mary faced a trial that would determine her fate and her children's future. Her strength, her resilience, had won the hearts of many. Despite the law being stacked against her, the tide turned in her favor. Powerful advocates fought for her release, and Mary Bryant was eventually granted a full pardon. Britain, a juggernaut empire, had come undone, not by armies or navies, but by the courage of a single fisherman's daughter. Mary Bryant's story is one for the ages. It's about daring to dream when hope seems dim. It's about staring down death and saying, "Not today." Her journey wasn't just a rebellion against her own chains. It was a rebellion against a system designed to crush the human spirit. Her escape exposed the cracks in what seemed like an impenetrable empire, proved that the will to be free is stronger than any prison walls. Today, Mary's name isn't found in most history textbooks, but her story deserves to be shouted from the rooftops. She wasn't a queen, a general, or a ruler of any sort. She was one of us, a simple, flawed human who dared to defy circumstances and grasped freedom with her calloused hands. So the next time you hear someone utter the phrase, "impossible," think of Mary Bryant, the convict who outran an empire. If you ask me, her name should stand tall among history's greatest adventurers. Not because she was a ruler of men, but because she ruled her own fate against all odds. This was the Chronicles of Human History. Subscribe for more stories that reveal the extraordinary chapters of our shared past. Until next time, dare to dream, and never underestimate the power of one person's courage to change the course of history.